Many thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. Now, in 2023, the production of palm oil in Nigeria reached 1.4 million metric tons. Despite the improvement in production, Nigeria has fallen from its position as world leader to the fifth largest producer, a spot it has held for over 5 years now. It is no news that in the 1950s, the country generated about 43% of the world's total production, which satisfied local demand, with excess exported. But available data shows that Nigeria has become a net importer of palm oil. However, earlier in the mid-March, Nigerian company Oken Saffron concluded a transaction with FMAV to acquire 86.7% of the latter's shareholding in Siat Group, which held a 60% stake in Presco, one of the country's main oil palm producers. The deal highlighted the investment opportunities in a sector where some players are seeing gradual top-line growth in their performance. We're joined now by two brilliant analysts and economists looking at the oil palm sector in Nigeria and the investment opportunities across key sectors, including agriculture, to tell us what to expect from this sector. First is Abigail Alabi, who is Sub-Saharan Africa agricultural analyst at Vetiva Capital Management with a bachelor's degree in economics and experience in investment research. She's also joined by Segun Adams, who is investment research analyst at AfriInvest West Africa, also an economist. Many thanks, Abigail and Segun, for being on Business Week. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Right.
Thank you for having us.
Most welcome. Abigail, let's begin with you. First things, for the benefit of our audience, let's get some clear differentiations here. When we say oil palm, palm oil, crude palm oil, what's the difference here? Are these just used interchangeably?
Okay, so in casual conversations, they are most times used interchangeably, but there's like a clear difference in terms of their stages of production. So palm oil or oil palm is majorly a tropical fruit or a tropical palm tree that is mainly cultivated in Africa and also Southwest Asia, and it's where we get palm oil from. And then also crude palm oil, that's also abbreviated into CPO. It's the raw and unrefined form of palm oil that's gotten from the old seeds from the palm tree. And most of the time, they also contain lots of impurities, so they have to be refined to be able to be used in various applications and also various stages. And that's where we can see that it is not being able to be used for consumption and any other processes in its raw and unrefined form. And then for palm oil, it's a generic term for the edible oil extracted from the oil palm. So it goes through a lot of refining process for it to be used in various applications like processed foods, cosmetics, biodiesel, and also other pharmaceuticals too. So these are the clear differences between oil palm oil, and also crude palm oil.
Oh, so it's pretty much, it speaks to what refining level it's on,
Yes.
just like with crude oil anyways,
Exactly.
as well, what extraction level you've been on. Thanks for that clarification. Now I'll come to you, Segun. You can both answer this. What's accounting for the strength of crude palm oil market in Nigeria, and how does the removal of palm oil from the FX restriction list basically impact this entire market? Let's start with you, Segun, please.
All right, thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here. So for the removal of the FX restriction, I would like to note that the policy to restrict FX access for oil palm producers was initially informed by a protectionist view. That is, they tried to help the local market develop by restricting what can come into the country, but it sort of backfired because that's not the way economics work. And you had a lot of incidents of smuggling into the country, and then those people tried to undercut the local producers, and that was a lot of problem for local production. With the removal of FX, I think it's an opportunity to rethink our strategy towards supporting this sector, so at least there's a shift in mindset. But in terms of FX, we know that during the period where you had that FX restriction, players usually look into the alternative market to try to tap liquidity. So there's not much of a difference between then and now in terms of how access will work for FX. But in terms of what it means for rethinking the strategy on the national level, I think it provides the opportunity to rethink strategy.
All right, I see. Abigail?
Okay, so to answer the first question on what's accounting for the strength of the palm oil sector, so number one is the production levels, the domestic production. Like you mentioned, Nigeria is currently number 5 in place of world production of palm oil. And as a result, we have a steady supply of palm oil production in Nigeria. And number 2 is the versatility and also the demand for palm oil. So palm oil is a versatile product. And like I mentioned earlier, it can be used in processed foods, cosmetics, and other pharmaceuticals. And also, given the fact that there's a rising population in Nigeria, we have also seen an increased demand for that commodity as well. So like I said, it's very versatile, and so there's an increased demand too. And also export opportunities as well. Most naturally or traditionally, key players in Nigeria look towards international markets for export. So we have seen the likes of Presco and other players to also try to get mitigate against the fluctuating FX, but also reaching out to other markets too. And lastly, you also see importation substitution as well. One of the major, palm oil is a very, very cost-effective substitute for sunflower oil and also rapeseed oil and soybean oil. So because we are trying to reduce our dependence on those imported commodities or those imported oils, we are seeing an increased demand in the use of palm oil. And like you said, one of the major reasons for the implementation of this restriction was for a protectionist policy. But at the same time, we also created like a pricing advantage for local players too. In as much as we saw some smuggling happening too, but we also saw a price advantage for local players. And given the lifting of this restriction, we expect to see an influx of cheaper products from the borders, and that would also cause some sort of price fluctuation and also competition. But we expect companies like Presco to still maintain their market share due to their premium products. And also we expect other companies, other producers also to also look towards the domestic market to supply domestic markets. So basically, that's what we expect given this lifting of restrictions.
So quite a number of moving parts here, certainly, and it's good to see what dynamic this, basically how this shifts the dynamic within the industry. But, you know, talking about Presco, which you mentioned earlier and I highlighted in the intro, we recently saw an ownership change there where, you know, a stake, Oaken Saffron has taken a 60% interest in this company through SEAT. How does this acquisition shape the industry landscape? And more importantly, what benefits and opportunities does this pose for the new owners? And we can take from both of you on this.
Okay, thank you very much. So just to provide quick context, what you have is SEAT NV is a Belgium-owned agro-industrial multinational. The company has a very strong footprint in Africa, in Nigeria. They are the owners of Presco with a 60% stake. And then in Ghana, they own the Ghana Oil Processing Development Company and then SHS in Cote d'Ivoire. Now, when you look at the significance of this acquisition, which simply is Oak and Saffron by majority stake in the parent company of the subsidiary businesses I mentioned, the significance is that it emphasizes the strategic intention of Oak and Saffron to position itself as a leading player in the African agro space and precisely in oil palm production. Now, why this is very interesting, I should first of all note that it does not affect the share ownership structure of Presco, and it's a very interesting acquisition because there's value for all parties involved. When you look at for Oak and Saffron, on the back of this acquisition, you look at one of the companies, which is Presco, we're talking about. Presco is a front runner in the domestic industry. It has a very vast agricultural asset, 24,000 hectares. If you look at that has filtered into their performance, when you look at the 2023 numbers, you see that the company also has cost efficiency, 11% cost margin, 30% net margin, at the same time 90% ROE, which is an incredible business. And so for Oak and Saffron, they're able to, through these businesses, acquire additional 70,000 hectares. And that's a very incredible because it translates to 100,000 metric tons per annum in terms of CPO and PKO. At the same time, Oak and Saffron is able to leverage the managerial and the technical competence within SEAT itself. For Presco, this will there will be a lot of strategic cost saving and economies of skills to realize. But importantly, and this is why I'm even more excited about it, when you look at the data on production in Nigeria, it has somewhat stagnated in the past 2-3 years at 1.4, while consumption has been growing at 4% per annum. At that rate, by 2030, you have a shortfall of almost 700,000. And that is a very huge gap we don't want. So the growing consumption means there is demand as population grow. And then when you see acquisitions like this, you have a visionary business combining with one that has strong execution track record and then a profitable business as Presco, then the narrative for the industry is very exciting. So that's
so this sounds like a win-win for everyone involved, a very symbiotic relationship going on here.
Very much so, including the shareholders of Presco.
Yes, certainly, it does sound like that. Great, great. It's great to hear that. But of course, I want to talk about something we can't ignore. Inflation, interest interest rates, we're in that environment right now. So how would you say that key oil palm producers are navigating this macroeconomic conditions in light of what we have? And we can get Abby to go on this one.
Okay, so as you rightly said, the palm oil players are seriously navigating high inflation, which has caused an increase in input cost, and also navigating high interest rates, as well, which has made borrowing very much expensive and also reduced access to credit. So one of the major things that we have seen palm oil players do is also to try and implement cost control measures and also to explore locally sourced alternatives and potentially cheaper inputs. We also seen them also focus on the Nigerian market as well. Nigeria is a net importer of palm oil, and because of that, we are also seeing these players focus on the Nigerian market because there's a huge potential, there's also a huge population, and that translates into a huge demand. Alongside also the Nigerian market, we also seen them also explore other markets as well, like I said, to be able to mitigate against this FX risk. And also we also seen them just shift from just the traditional palm oil or exporting the raw crude palm oil to exploring or processing much more premium products that can also add value and also command potentially higher prices. So I see a lot of these things combined, majorly the cost control measures that these people have been putting into their businesses to be able to ensure that cost-wise they're able to manage costs and also to maximize revenue as well.
And of course, I would expect economies of scale also plays here because that already brings your like. Would you like to add to that in any way, Segun?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. When you look at the financial performance for 2023, you see that across the players, they were able to expand top line 26-27%. However, across the board, that's for listed players, cost of sale outpaced revenue growth. So you had a compression of gross margin. But when you look further down their performance, and you notice that operating margin actually improved, and that's quite interesting in the period where you have triple threat of increasing inflation, you have rising borrowing costs, you have FX volatility, then you're having businesses that are improving OPEX. That speaks a lot to their strategy. You can have a price-led strategy, you try to improve your price to mitigate the impact, or a volume-led strategy, you're looking for new market share within your region or outside of that, or incentives to sustain demand, or a heads-on strategy, which is a cost-led strategy. So when you look at the performance, gross margin for Como improved in single digits, and then for Presco increased by 16% point, which is very significant at 11%. OPEX margin, sorry, not gross margin, OPEX margin of 11%, which is remarkable. So that highlights the strategy that are really focused on looking within the operation. How can we improve efficiency along our value chains? Are there areas where we can explore opportunities to renegotiate contracts and, like you mentioned, source materials locally? So we expect that will still be a strategy for 2024 rather, because all of these headwinds are still persisting, and that has worked evidently. So we expect
this has kept them afloat quite creatively as well. But I'm going to stay with you on that thought, Segun. In terms, you spoke about market share, and that leads me to think about competitiveness. Firstly, I want to ask, how are we doing competitively in the global scale? We're talking just Nigeria so far. So how are we doing competitively, and what can Nigeria do to build a more stronger competitive base within Africa and globally, especially around the agricultural sector?
So at the moment, like you mentioned earlier on, we are 5th largest producer in the world. In Africa, number 1. That's ahead of Ivory Coast doing 600. Then you have Cameroon and Ghana following closely. So what you then see, if you look at the historical context, Nigeria historically had been the leading producer in the world with a market share of 43 to 45% in the 1960s. However, the relegation of this sector because of the oil market led to a vicious cycle of underinvestment. So the neglect led to low productivity, led to low output, and then made the sector unattractive to investment, and then that cycle keeps perpetuating. Today, you find out that around 70% of the industry is very fragmented. You have very small players isolated. So you cannot benefit from scale economies in that sort of scenario. And then the industry is not well positioned to attract the kind of funding it needs. So you have that very crude agricultural practices. One of the things we think that is very vital in turning the corner would be to increase investment into that sector. When you look at the countries that we are trying to overtake, in terms of R&D to GDP, they are quite ahead. Nigeria is 0.1%. A country like Malaysia is doing 1%, and Indonesia is doing 2%, almost in line with global trend. So that would be a good place to start with. Another one quickly would be to create an enabling environment where you can see a lot of this kind of acquisition. you have a very large investor with the fund come together to aggregate all of the smaller players, and then you can achieve that scale economies that
All
we
right,
need.
so it sounds very investment-centric as a solution to me. Abigail, do you echo his thoughts, or do you think there are other ways to approach this?
According to what you said, we need lots of investments in the sector. And during this restriction period, I think one of the major things that we saw was like reduced investment due to foreign exchange restrictions. So once we see that restriction has been lifted, we'll most likely see an influx of investment into that sector. And like he said, we are seeing the likes of Indonesia and Malaysia really do remarkable things, especially in the biodiesel segment. And so one place we can also look at. I mean, earlier this year, the aviation sector was looking into using palm oil for biodiesel for aviation fuel. And that's the one thing that we can also look at to be able to extract as much value as we can from these commodities, and also to ensure that we can also give this value to other sectors too. I mean, we've seen what Indonesia has done with the palm oil. We saw that last year they completed their first commercial flight with palm oil-based jet fuel. So something we can also do here, so giving the right amount of investment.
All right. Back to investment, but yeah, it sounds like that's the bedrock of it, right? It has to start from that, what one would imagine. But let's get a little more granular, and we can have both of you respond to this. Let's look at the overall contribution of this sector to Nigeria's GDP. Do we have any numbers floating around? How are we doing in that regard?
Okay, let me take that very quickly, because it's quite interesting when we're looking at the numbers for 2023. We saw that the sector, that is oil palm, contribution to GDP was 0.6% nominal GDP. And then when you try to scale that to look at, to agri as a sector activity sector on its own, that was around 2.5. And then for crop production, which is the segment it fits squarely with, it was around 2.8%. In context, available data for countries like Malaysia showed that their contribution to GDP is around 2.5, and that's for Malaysia, and then Singapore is around 4.5. If we had a situation where Nigeria was able to achieve that 4.5, what it would have done, it would have been additional 4 percentage points growth to GDP. That is, rather than grow 15% in nominal terms last year, it would have grown by 19%. So evidently, there is a lot of underutilization or untapped potential within that sector. So it's something that we think that has to be unlocked for us to realize greater benefits. In terms of employment, at the same time, there's a lot of potential for that to absorb a substantial part of the labor force. Currently, because of the crude practices there, we have a lot of low-skilled employment or low productivity type labor going on in that sector. But if we're able to turn that sector around, then we should be able to see scientists along even the mid-skill, high-skill, low-skill, and an expansion of absorption of the labor force in the economy, and that would be very positive.
All right, so I've got untapped potential, is what Segun is saying as well. Lots of work needs to be done, but what do you see in terms of the outlook in the near future for the sector?
Okay, so I mean, over the last few years, we have seen the CBN really try to improve access to credit to smallholder farmers. While that has not yielded the amount of result that we expected to see, we're also seeing that this new government or this new development from the CBN is also trying to also expand the same credit onto smallholder farmers too, and we expect that long term to yield much more results given the efforts by the CBN. Also, one of the key things that we also need to work on is infrastructure facilities in the agri sector. I mean, we currently are dealing with about 60% of post-harvest losses. That means about 60% of most of the things we harvest go bad before they even get to the market. So we need to invest in storage facilities that can also be able to preserve these commodities before they even get to the consumer's table. And also investing in a very strong transportation network too, that can also facilitate the movement of agricultural goods from markets, from the farm to the market. And that also in a way be able to reduce or maybe in a way control these post-harvest losses, and also ensure the ease of access of consumers to these commodities. So, and also coupled with the fact that we also need much more investment as well in that sector. So those are the things, long-term are the things we will need to be able to drive significant growth in the agricultural sector.
Do you believe we're close to achieving all of these things very briefly?
I mean,
because these are quite a number of crucial points, very cogent points, one would expect. They sound like quite a number of them, but what do we see feasibility-wise?
I mean, you say thorny parts, it's not without its own struggles and also challenges and also its complexities. But I mean, we're on the way to get into we're on the way to get into dependence or self-dependence in the area of the agricultural sector. So I mean, we are still keeping our fingers crossed and hopeful that, this will yield significant results for us.
I like that, a very positive outlook there. And of course, we have to just keep that faith alive. Abigail and Segun, I want to thank you so much for coming. I wish we had a little more time. I would have loved to touch on geopolitics as well, because that would have been playing another role. But thank you. We're going to have this conversation another time. Many thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. Well, that's all we have time for in Business Week today. Do have a lovely rest of the weekend. Rolake Akinkube Fulani is back next week. I'm Adi Olawi.